Okay, welcome to Unit 2. We're going to talk about transportation and we're going to talk about the environment in this chapter and how trade is involved with both of those. If I can get the slide to advance. There we go. All right, so monitoring your shipment. It's very important that you have an inspection before it ships so that you know that what you sent on a sea container or in an airplane, especially in a sea container because it takes a long time, is what you intended to ship. So you can do it at the seller. A lot of times you're checking for both a count, making sure that you ordered 48 boxes and that each box has 26 inside of them or whatever it is, the count. But you're also checking to make sure none of the packaging is damaged. You're making sure that if it needs to be wrapped in shrink wrap to keep it dry or to keep it contained, things like that, you're checking that. And you're also sometimes checking quality. The reason that you'd want to check quality before something ships is that if you order something from another country and it's going to take a month maybe to get here on a boat, a ship, you don't want it to arrive, pay the customs fee, pay your broker, do all the things that you have to do only to find out that the quality is not what you expected and now you've paid and you've waited and it wasn't right. There's a lot of third-party companies that do this. You give them your specifications and they will do the inspection for you before something ships so that you do not have to either send someone that is your employee to do that or fly over and check it before you ship it. So what you're seeing here on the right in red is a sea container. You've probably seen these on ships or on trucks going down the road. Lots of these are traveling, especially around Houston. There's a lot of markings on this one, and so it's showing you what the container weighs empty so that they know container weight empty minus what it weighs that at that moment. It tells you what the cargo that's inside of it weighs. There's always an ID number on that. There's always a seal. So you can see toward the bottom of the container there are those horizontal bars. Those lock, and then a piece of plastic goes through it. It looks kind of like a zip tie. And it has a number on it. And that number is recorded on the bill of lading, which we're going to talk about what that is in just a moment. And if it were cut or damaged, it would be obvious because it has a number on it. So you couldn't replace it. That ensures that no one has entered the container to take anything or put anything in once it's out of your hand. So usually a broker will do that for you. You should have, they refer to something as a foul or a clean BOL, which is bill of lading. We're going to talk about that on the next couple slides here. But foul means that someone wrote on it. It means that it was typed up and then somebody either crossed something out and initialed it or whatever. That is not allowed. A clean bill of lading is super important. What that means is that there are no mistakes and no corrections on it. One more back to inspections. A broker can inspect on your behalf, and you should provide, whether you're going to do it yourself or whether you're going to have someone do it for you, you should have someone do an inspection as soon as the goods arrive. Very important. So there's a lot of documentation. That's what we were just talking about, a bill of lading. We'll talk about what that is. But there's a lot of documentation that goes with your shipment. And the reason is back to kind of when we talked about on Unit 1 in the Incoterms is who owns it. So evidence of title is basically if you have a title to your car, that means it's yours. If the bank still has it, it means that you're still making payments on it. So while you're using the car, you don't actually fully own it yet. So evidence of title is, all that means is who owns it. And so we were talking about that the other day. If the boat is sailing from China to the port of Houston and it sinks, or it has a mechanical problem and has a fire, or 100 different things could go wrong. A sea container could not be sealed tightly and it could get wet. There's a whole bunch of problems that could happen. But if that does happen, who owns it? At what point did the title or the ownership, think of the word title as the word ownership, transfer? So for an ocean shipment, we generally will generate 3 bills of lading. And so just something so you can sound smart when you're in the industry and you're doing your job. You don't want to say bill of ladings. You want to say bills of lading. That is how it's properly said. You don't want to say bill of ladings and put the S on the lading. You want to put the S on the word bill. So bills of lading. You need to know what the process and the procedure is for the shipper that you're using. Generally, a customs broker will get 1 bill of lading, and 2 will go either to the shipmaster or to me. A lot of this is done electronically now, but if you are still working with someone who does it on paper, that's the way it's generally done. And then for an air shipment, the bills of lading generally stay with the shipment, the invoice, and the packing list, and it's all together because an air shipment happens so quickly. It's loaded and unloaded generally in the same day, whereas something could be on the ocean for 3 or 4 weeks, and also the elements are an issue. Is something going to get wet and things like that, so they want to be careful. So a carrier is the name of anyone who is transporting goods for you. So it could be a trucking company, it could be a sea company, a marine company that's going to carry things for you over the ocean. It could be an airline, could be FedEx or UPS or anything, but all those people who actually do transportation, that is called a carrier. So risk of loss is, again, back to who has the title. If there's an accident, a lot of times it's governed, the risk of loss is governed by the flag under which the ship is chartered. So if it's a ship that's sailing out of whatever that country is, even if that's not where they left from or where they're going to, but if the ship is chartered in that country, a lot of times that's where the laws prevail. And you'll find that a lot of shipping companies are chartered out of very, very small, obscure countries, but it's because they have favorable laws to the to the carrier, not to the shipper. Sometimes it happens, it's governed by where the accident occurred. Sometimes it's governed by the nationality of the shipper, but all these things are things you have to negotiate. There are some rules here. None of this is on your test, but around liability, if you're interested in looking at that. If there's an accident on an air shipment, the Warsaw Convention or the Montreal Convention is usually the prevailing law. And then, local laws govern if there's an accident on a land shipment. Usually, any documents that you're going to find are going to be written with the advantage toward the airline, the marine company, the carrier, not to the person who paid the carrier and said, please get my stuff to this other location. So this is on your test, almost everything on here. So definitely keep an eye on this slide. So for sea, air, and land, we want to do an inland bill of lading and a through bill of lading. So an inland bill of lading is how I get something if it needs to go a couple of modes of transportation on land. If I need a through bill is I'm going to ship it on a sea to the Port of Houston, and then someone's going to pick it up and take that and put it on a truck maybe or on a rail car and get it to College Station or to Dallas or something like that. The things that are on these, I asked you for a couple of these on your test. The shipper, the consignee is the person that's actually that's the recipient, where it's departing from, where it's being delivered to, what everything is, how much it weighs, how many packages. It might say 7 pallets with 24 boxes each, things like that. And then what the payment for the freight, not the payment for the goods, but the payment for the freight. The Federal Maritime Commission is referred to as the FMC, is the governing body that makes sure that the carrier has clear and standard transportation documents to make sure that they're conforming with the tariff, they are clear, that they're all the same, and so that they're easy to read. This is an example of an ocean bill of lading. So this is for a company called Maersk. You have an exercise on your homework where I'm going to ask you to pull one up and talk to me about who it's going to, what the goods are, etc. So you'll learn how to read one of these. This is for a port-to-port shipment. So this would be going from the port in Switzerland to a port in another part of Switzerland, in Basel. So it's a receipt for the goods. Once this has been received, it's the receipt that says, yes, the goods arrived. It's also what they call a contract of carriage. So what that means is that a carrier is going to, when they accept your bill of lading, they accept the goods and they accept the responsibility for getting them to the location. A straight bill of lading says that it has to be signed when the person that's receiving it gets it. So sometimes you're getting something on your dock in your company, you'll always sign for it. But if you're getting something that's been transferred with a bill of lading, it has to be signed to be able to be paid from. And then if an order bill of lading is basically says whoever has the bill of lading is the consignee. It doesn't necessarily have to be addressed to a specific thing. It just says that the bearer means I am holding it, and if I have it, then it's mine. This is an example of an air bill. You've probably seen that, an airway bill. You've probably seen this. People call these an air bill too. Air bill, AWB, or an airway bill. Any of those are the same. And you can see there's two different ways to spell way bill. Sometimes they say WAI bill. Sometimes they say WEIGH bill. It's all correct. And this can be used if you have a letter of credit. If I say, look, I've contracted with a carrier, so that's contract of carriage, and they have accepted my goods, so that can often trigger the payment under a letter of credit. So the bank will say, okay, FedEx has taken the package, we know it's going to be delivered safely, and we can release the money. So forwarders and a house bill of lading. So a freight forwarder, this is on your test, and there's going to be a chart of several multiple choice questions where you're going to need to know, is this the function of a freight forwarder, a function of a broker, or both of these freight forwarders and brokers both do this. So freight forwarders, think about if you're hiring a moving truck. Let's say you're moving your apartment from Houston to Seattle. You can't fill an entire 18-wheeler truck with just the contents of your apartment. So what the moving company will tell you is, we're going to wait. We're going to pack your house, your apartment, and then we're going to wait. And then in a couple of days, we have some other people, and they're moving to Portland, Oregon. So we're going to put their stuff on the truck as well. We're going to leave Houston, drive to Portland, unload their stuff, and then we'll come to Seattle and unload your stuff. That's exactly what a freight forwarder does. They consolidate shipments, and they're generally acceptable for all parts of the transportation. They'll pick it up and get it door to door. But a freight forwarder is a freight consolidator. And if you just think about that, it makes it very easy to know the difference between a forwarder and a broker. They are going to ask for you for a house bill of lading or a house airway bill, because they're going to want to make sure that they know where it's leaving from and how it's getting where it's going. So they can we'll go get it off the plane, and we will drive it, put it on a rail car, whatever needs to happen. It can be multiple modes of shipment. Both the forwarder and the carrier are going to want a master bill of lading or a master airway bill, and that would show all the stops. This is on your exam, that's why it's red. An issue for caution here is that you need to make sure that if you have a house bill of lading and a master bill of lading, the terms on them cannot be different. And the reason I put the graphic there for you with an apple and an orange is to show you that you do not want them to be different, because if they are different, now we don't know which one is the prevailing rule. And so if this one says, for example, that there's the payment terms are 15 days for the freight, and this one says that the payment terms are 30 days, which one is the right one? And that can make huge disputes and lots of problems. And also, if there's a dispute about that, sometimes they'll hold your freight and they won't allow your freight to be released. And so you're fighting because you made a paperwork mistake, and that's very dangerous if you're trying to run a business. This is on your test as well. A FIATA bill of lading is, the reason it's FIATA is it's French. So in French, International Federation of Freight Forwarders Association actually is FIATA, because it's not in the same order because it's French. But a FIATA bill of lading is a house standard transport document. They made a house bill of lading where everything's the same. It's about equal. Some of the terms are favorable to the shipper, some are favorable to the carrier, but it is a very kind of moderate, this says very moderate document. That's a very good way to explain it. This is a matching on your test where you're going to need to know that the reason it's called a FIATA is that it's a French acronym, and that it's a moderate bill of lading with moderate rules for multi-mode transport. And multi-mode means air, rail, ground, sea. It can go of multiple reasons. And the reason that you'd want to do that is if you're shipping something, it can't go to Dallas if it's coming from an overseas, because without going multi-mode, because there's no way to land a boat or a ship in Dallas, right? We're going to need to bring it into Houston or New Orleans or Los Angeles or whatever, some port city, and then either put it on a plane, on a train, or in a truck to get it to that inland location. So that's called multi-mode. This is on your test as well. Cargo insurance is a part of a strategy to mitigate risk. If you buy insurance for your cargo, what that means is that if anything goes wrong, then you will have insurance to cover the cost of your replacement. So it should cover risk. It should talk about what the coverage is. It should absolutely say what is excluded. So maybe if there's a leak or if there's an act of some kind of a fire or something like that on the ship, it will cover it. But if there's a hurricane, it won't. So things like that. So this is something that you need to be prepared for on your exam. All right, we're going to completely change channels here. And the second part of Unit 2 is about trade and the environment. You're going to do a case this week called the sea turtle case. It's very famous in international trade law and environmental law. So you'll hear this probably again in your world. But the first thing I want to talk to you about is the World Trade Organization. So the World Trade Organization is an organization that give or take, people leave and come into it, but somewhere between 190 and 200 countries belong to it. And what it basically says is we're going to make some rules about how global international trade is going to work, and everyone who belongs to the WTO, World Trade Organization, is going to comply with those rules. You're going to do a project that's due in week 6, and it's going to have trade profiles on countries that's published by the WTO. So we're going to talk a little bit today. There are no specific provisions in the WTO's charter that give them any kind of power or any kind of jurisdiction about the government, but they have gotten involved in a lot of things because countries have had complaints, and they have taken them to the WTO to ask for arbitration or a decision. So most countries that belong to the WTO think that the way to address this is to have equal, equitable, a trading system that will have at its forefront policies that are good for the environment. So there is a committee on trade and the environment. They brought some cases and they've addressed some cases, but in general, they rest on this bottom bullet. They're only competent to deal with trade, and they're not an environmental agency. So they do not invite these cases to be brought, but they will try to help. But they're really there's a very strong feeling that the World Trade Organization is really not the right place to address these environmental issues. And you'll read about this a lot in that sea turtle case if you haven't already done that assignment yet this week. So there is not really a good forum for figuring out, arbitrating, resolving disputes when one party is part of the WTO. What if the other one is not? What if one party is part of an environmental agreement, the other party is not? So there's problems with that. We can also talk about eco-labeling. So most favored nation is a concept that we'll talk about in a couple of slides here, but you can't discriminate between trading partners. If I say that I'm going to give XYZ this good deal, this country, I cannot go back and give a worse deal to another country on an environmental platform here. So transparency, they have a lot of issues about, there's so much paperwork, and they want to give the information but without too much paperwork. They want to find a way, and they're asking the WTO to help with this, but the WTO necessarily, again, does not feel competent dealing with these environmental issues. We also have a lot of concern that there are some products that people think are dangerous. So these could be things that could be flammable, could be things that might hurt your skin. It could be things that maybe aren't properly labeled that a child could swallow apart. There's a whole bunch of things, or it could be things that are dangerous to the environment, but there's not really a way to address that. And then, are we having sustainable development? And so liberalization means freedom to trade with more partners, and sustainable is about, are we replenishing the resources that we're reusing? You're going to do some exercises on intellectual property both this week and toward the end of the class. And so that's also something that's being addressed by the WTO. And just trade in general. So I put this at the end of the slide deck because I want to make sure you're familiar with these terms. I think we walked through every one of these last week. There's a good video there on subsidies. You can read about it. Every one of these is on your test. So you need to be prepared. You need to know these definitions so that you can find the right definition for the right word. I would highly recommend that you take a couple of minutes and watch that video on subsidies, because there is going to be a question on the test that is not on the review that you're going to need to be prepared to answer. All right, that's Unit 2.